You're a bunch of brave souls, aren't you? How many of you have seen CHICKENHAWK, first of all? Really? Well, at least you've seen it, okay. Boy, howdy. You guys are in for one hell of a night. This is a film that has gotten a lot of controversy over the years, and pretty soon you're going to see why. It's a film that I've probably seen at least a few dozen times over the past 10 or 11 years since I first saw it. And it's the kind of film where you watch and you wonder how a filmmaker could go out and spend time with these subjects for so long. I mean, the shortest film still takes sometimes 6 months to a year. So if you're going to do a documentary, you're going to live with these people and that subject for that long. And so it's a real honor to have the filmmaker here tonight, and we can ask some of these questions. So please give a warm Philadelphia welcome to Adi Sideman, the director. Come on up.
Thank you, Matt.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. We did CHICKENHAWK 18 years ago. I was a sophomore NYU film student, and I had just come out of the army in Israel, and I tried to do narrative film, and I sucked. I couldn't direct actors for the life of me, and I figured that instead of flunking film school, I was going to do documentaries. And I was looking for a topic, and I was sitting in a sociology class, and it was called Sexual Deviance in Society. They have since changed the name of that course to Sexual Diversity in Society, which is more politically correct. And the teacher spent time on all kinds of diversities, and one of them was pedophilia, and she mentioned NAMBLA, and I was shocked that this group exists. And so I remember walking up to the teacher after class and saying, this would be a great subject for a documentary. How can I get in touch with them? And she said, well, their number's in the phone book. And so I called, and little did I know that, like NBC was doing stories about them, and like a lot of news organizations were trying to get the story. And I got the story because I was 22 and non-threatening, and I had a very little camera that nobody thought could amount to anything. And so literally I would be in meetings with them while outside there would be crews from CNN and the networks not getting in. So that's kind of like the setup, and I look forward to, I guess, the QA session afterwards, and really excited to be here. Thank you, Matt and Eric and everyone else who invited me, and really excited to see the shorts afterwards and meet the other filmmakers. So thanks.
All right, so how'd you guys like that? All right, let's bring him back up here. Adi Sideman, the director. So before we started, you said it had been about 10 years since you had screened it for this kind of audience.
Yeah, it was brought back 10 years later in the Anthology Film Archives in New York, and the original opening was there as part of the New York Underground Film Festival. Todd Phillips of Todd Phillips fame.
The Hangover and Old School.
G.G. Allen.
And of course G.G. Allen.
Exactly. Yeah. And he did another one about hazing, which was called Frat House, that nobody ever saw. And I'm an idiot because I had a VHS tape of it at home and I never made a copy. But it won Sundance, and then HBO sued him, and the parents of the kids in the movie Frat House sued HBO and Todd, and he could never show it. But it's a great movie. It's one of the best documentaries about hazing.
So VHS permanently gone?
Yeah, the VHS is gone. I give it back to him. But Todd was distributing the movie, and he got Film Threat to distribute it, and I forget the question.
That's good. There were actually copies of Frat House. I actually got it at the same video store, Kim's
Really?
Video. I rented it there, the same place I rented CHICKENHAWK. So
Really?
It was totally a bootleg.
Yeah.
But it was available.
Frat House is amazing. In the middle of the movie, they get driven out of town by their subjects, who are these kids who are doing the hazing, who decided that the filmmakers are no longer, it was Todd and his partner, are no longer objective and are not going to make a good documentary about them. And so they're out of the movie, in the middle of the movie, and they got $400,000 from HBO, and all this is on camera. And so the only way that they can finish a movie about hazing is if they find another university to let them do the other half of the hazing, and nobody would do it. Like they interview, and so they need to pledge themselves. And so Todd Phillips is in a cage having guys piss on him in the second half of the movie because he's being, trying to get his film done. And so it's really an amazing documentary in the sense that the filmmaker becomes a subject halfway through. It's great. Yeah.
Cool. So why don't you take us back to the very beginning? Like, I guess you were saying that you had a class, and that's where you found out about NAMBLA?
Yeah, so, I was drawn to the subject matter because I had some experience. I was molested when I was 8 years old by a pedophile who was a neighbor. And I really didn't put the two together. I mean, I've always known it, and I've talked about it with friends, and I wasn't hiding it, and I was aware of it. But it was, probably like 6 months into making the movie that I was really putting the pieces together, thinking that I am doing this movie because I am very curious about what these people are actually thinking.
So who was the first person that you got in touch with? Was it Peter, the coordinator?
No, it was Renato who had the answering machine in his house, and I think I was lucky enough that he picked up on, the first call. I never left a message, and yeah.
And did you get any resistance from other members of NAMBLA that appeared in the film or chose not to appear in the film?
So at every turn, there seemed to have been some kind of committee behind the scenes making, kind of a access decision of sorts, and it was always decided that they would leave it up to the individual members. So they never blocked me as a rule, which was good. And then there was one guy in Boston, I forget his name, and he was a professor of English in Boston University. He was kind of a respectable guy, and we drove up to his house, and everybody told me he was one of the leaders of the gay movement and one of the leaders of NAMBLA and whatnot. And he was the only guy who asked me straight up. He said, "Why are you doing this movie?" And so none of the subjects in the movie asked me that question. And one guy did, and I told him the truth, which is, diplomatically, I said, well, I had an experience with a pedophile when I was a boy, and, I have interest in the topic. And he said, was it a good experience or a bad experience? And I said, well, I can't say it was a good experience. And he basically said, this was after we drove all the way from New York to Boston and set up the lights in his living room. He basically said, no show. So that was the only time we were shunned.
Now, what about, since this was a student film, how did the administration of NYU feel about this? Was there any resistance?
My professor at the time, George Stoney, he was a 74-year-old guy who looked really old. And he kept really nicely suggesting throughout me making the movie that I should be interviewing victims. And I didn't feel that was organic to the movie. I thought that the movie was about the perpetrators. And then when I finished the movie and he saw a rough cut or a final cut, or he saw it a few times, the anxiety level went up because he felt like I should be putting on titles saying that I don't condone pedophilia because he felt like the movie was not clear enough about that. And I refused to do it. And so he asked that his name would be removed from it. We went to SVA to edit because NYU didn't really like the movie, and then they wanted their name off of it. And afterwards, when it was written up in the Times and the Village Voice and on CNN and whatnot, they asked to put it into the film festival and the university, and then it won the film festival and all this. So they wanted their name back on.
As someone that went to SVA,
SVA was much cooler. Yeah, they gave me no problems. We could stay there all night.
So why don't you talk a little bit about the premiere? Because I've read that it was very, very controversial. There were members of NAMBLA that showed up, I believe.
Right. I remember your question from before. So the 10th year anniversary was in the Anthology Film Archive, and the most fascinating thing about it was nobody had a copy, and we were there, and there was like 400 people or 200, whatever, a lot of people in the audience, and they found a 16 millimeter from 10 years before from the premiere on like just a fluke, and I still have it because they gave it to me as a present afterwards. But it was just lying there for 10 years in the projection room.
Oh my God.
Wow. So that was the last time I was actually in public talking about the movie. But you were asking.
Yeah, so as far as like the premiere at the New York Underground, it was the first annual New York Underground, right?
Yeah, it was the first time. So it was, my parents were there sitting in the front row with me, and then in the second row it was all the pedophiles, and then in the third row it was Straight Kids USA, who were the crazies in the movie who were demonstrating against them. Then Howard Stern's guys, like the stuttering guy, were there, and John Waters was there, and then in the middle of the screening, CNN was coming in to shoot like the audience watching the movie, and John Waters was like, "Get out of here! It's only a movie!" And so that was cool. So it made some noise. And for me, the most exciting piece of that screening, which I'm really proud of actually, is that afterwards the pedophiles came up to me and shook my hand and thanked me for projecting them in a humane light and giving them an opportunity to present their case. And a second later, I turned around and the Straight Kids USA came over and patted me in the back and told me what a great job I did in displaying these monsters to society. So I thought that I managed to do an even-handed job, and I'm proud of that.
Now, how long was the production?
It was a year, and then we had some 2 days of reshoot where we went upstate New York to shoot all the car scenes that we didn't catch in West Virginia.
Now, of all the members, what was the most trying, the most uncomfortable for you to get through it? Unless you were able to totally...
So I never personally, I never had any issue, really. Leyland Stevenson was very, very engaged and involved. So we drove in his car, me and my crew. We were students, we didn't have money. So he took us in his car to West Virginia to visit the place where he had these episodes with the kids. He recommended the music for the movie, which was Ravel and Debussy, and he knew exactly what the soundtrack should be. He was talking, this was before the internet, but he was asking us questions about how to do file sharing and stuff like that. He was very curious about it. He was talking about that a lot. And he was helping to open doors and facilitate, communication within the organization. So he was very involved, and afterwards, for about 5 years, he would send me, how do you call it? The holiday of love. What is it? February 14th.
Oh, Valentine's Day.
Thank you. He would send me Valentine's Day cards for 5 years afterwards.
Wow. Do you still have them?
No. I don't remember cherishing or keeping that.
So before I open it up to the audience, just one last question. Did you find yourself, after having made the film, that people were judging you incorrectly, that people somehow thought that you were a member of NAMBLA or that you supported them in any way? Because to me, by the end of the movie, it's perfectly clear where you stand. That the fact that you have everyone's name come up with a shot of them, and then especially that last line, which is pretty damning. Actually, real before you get to that, what did he say to you once he asked you to turn the camera off?
I don't remember.
Okay.
It was 20 years ago.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but I don't remember. Probably nothing. Probably something very benign.
But yeah. So back to my other question. Did you have to explain yourself to friends, or did you find people that were questioning your intent?
So my dad, I remember being in a cab with him on 14th Street, and he's an Israeli guy, and he said, you know, you've been spending a year on pedophilia, why don't you make a love story between a boy and a girl? And I said, well, Dad, you know, I was molested when I was a kid, and, you know, I'm interested. And he said, which was, you know, kind of, it sounds a little shocking, I accept. He said a lot of people, it's happened to a lot of people. And he didn't want to talk about it. He kind of put it aside. So certainly from within my family, you know, they weren't psyched about me doing it. And then it got banned by sheriffs across the Midwest, because it played, when it opened, they attached some shorts to it like we're doing tonight, so it can be a feature. So when Forrest Gump was #1 on the Billboard charts, I was number 20, and it was actually playing. But it didn't really get, you know, it's like banned in 18 cities. It was banned in Israel by, you know, so people thought that it gave them a stage to speak on, and maybe my intentions were not perfectly clear. So yeah, it was controversial.
Okay, so questions from the audience? Yes.
Do you know how many of these people actually did jail time for anything?
So yeah.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Oh, it seems that there were at least, I don't know anything, this is actually my first, I mean, I knew about now, but this is the first time I have any more intimate contact with these people from your film, but it seems they're very careful to skirt, you know, just to not quite, you know, to go across the line. So I was just curious, like, how many of those people that you know of have done jail time? If they haven't, how do they stay out of jail? How do they do it?
Yeah. So 3 of the folks here, the blonde guy who was talking about Jeffrey Dahmer, he was a creep. And he was in prison while we were doing the movie, and I really regret not getting an interview with him in prison. And he got in trouble by, I think he himself became a karate instructor, just like he was telling us how he had a relationship with his karate instructor. And so I think he propagated that to younger boys in the karate school. And he was sitting in prison in Delaware for a while. And I felt like I shouldn't have asked permission. Like, I contacted his parents, I tried to get in the prison, I should have just did it. Leyland sat in prison for 5 years, I think. And he said that in the movie. And then there was the other guy, Wallace, the older gentleman, who sat in prison twice. So, you know, that's what we know.
Yes.
And these people try and, besides Leyland, try and keep in contact with you or track you down?
Not really, no. I mean, the young guy, Todd or Dodd, Chuck Dodd.
Chuck Dodson.
Yeah, thank
It looked
you.
like he was trying to seduce you at that one point.
You mean when he was naked?
Yeah.
You will not believe, but I was living, this was 93, I was living on 14th Street. This was my bedroom. And my cameraman couldn't make it that day, so I was shooting that alone, and I was setting it up, and I wasn't a very good shooter. I mean, you saw it sucked, that scene. He was just coming into town from wherever, you know, he was living in Massachusetts or somewhere, and he didn't have a place to stay. Now, he didn't stay the night with me, but we didn't have a place to shoot, and so we pretended like it was his room. You know, I probably was kind of, you know, I probably wasn't against, and I probably even suggested that he takes his clothes off, you know, just to make the scene more dramatic. So I had that kind of dramatic sense. The other thing was they wouldn't let me into a real NAMBLA meeting, which seemed to have never occurred, or if it occurred, it like was a secret. And so I had just moved apartments to this big loft on East 4th Street, and I had a NAMBLA meeting in my house downstairs. So that's when they're all laughing together, like at one point, and sitting around dinner. So that was in my downstairs, you know, just like an East Village basement. But at least my crew was there with me.
And in the back there?
Were there any other common deviancies between these people, in addition to being members of NAMBLA, did you notice any other
I think they all have had an experience as children, and I think they all took from it whatever they took from it, and sort of got stuck in that stage somehow. And so I think that was definitely the common thread, is that they've all had a sexual relationship with an adult when they were kids. Now I can't say it definitively because, you know, I don't know that I asked the question of each one of them, but throughout the stories and throughout, you know, hanging out with them, that was evident.
Do you think how they romanticize their encounters with these boys, is that sort of covering up for what is a deeper, nasty, predatory, sexual attraction?
You mean the sense of denial?
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, certainly there's a sense of denial, and certainly it's a tragedy for them that their sexuality is so problematic and illegal, and so they have to find a way to cope with it. And I think, you know, we saw different ways of how they're coping with it, and some of it is denial. And, yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned John Waters was at one of the screenings. Did you have any either backlash or just sheer admiration by anybody in the film community? Anything like that? Did anybody come out to you and like, that was great, or what the hell's wrong with you? Like, or anything like that? I don't know.
I remember there was a woman who came in from a Hollywood studio and flew in to meet with me because she wanted to know what's my next movie and to sign me up, and I didn't have a next movie and I wasn't ready. So I, you know, certainly it got enough press and attention that, you know, somebody was paying attention. You know, today I looked at it after many years that I haven't seen it, and, you know, I'm usually very critical of it. And kind of tonight I kind of forgave myself. I always thought that the last scene, the Chuck Dot scene, the younger guy, kind of sucked. And tonight it didn't look that bad. So, yeah. But it's, my friend now just finished a movie in Israel that's going to be playing in the Cannes Film Festival. And I am drilling into him to be ready with his next few projects because, you know, he's going to get approached and that's when he needs to be ready. And I wasn't, and that's fine.
Yes.
Actually, I had two comments. One was actually, you kept on mentioning the Frat House documentary, which actually, if you go on Google, you can look it up. It's actually online. You can find
Oh, it's available to see?
Yeah, you can do, like, if you do a Google search, there's a couple of articles, I think, around the time of, like, when they were announcing, like, Hangover, like, all big Todd
Phillips fans.
Todd Phillips stuff, yeah. I actually have a question about the, because it is kind of like 50-minute documentary. Was there any material, like, was everything that you shot pretty much up on screen, or was there any content that you felt like was maybe going too far, or anything more to any of the stories that you felt like either uncomfortable including?
So there was a tangent story about a group that was a man-girl love association that was kind of like a sister organization. I think it was called Uncommon Desires. The guy was running it was this lawyer, and he was just, I couldn't be in his presence. I really couldn't stomach it. I decided not to pursue it and to focus on, you know, just the man-boy aspect. So that was one thing that didn't make it in. The other one was that one of the NAMBLA lawyers was a woman who lived in Detroit, and we took a car trip to Detroit and we spent a day with her, and she had two little boys who were like age 6 and 8 or something, which is sort of the perfect age for the pedophiles. And she insisted that she had no problem with her boys, you know, spending time and having a relationship with the guys. And so we didn't include that. But overall, we had about 100 hours that we have shot. The scene that I really wanted to get was I wanted to have a relationship on and I was negotiating with them to get that on camera because there was a guy in Chicago who had a boyfriend, a kid boyfriend, and they were agreeing to get on camera and whatnot. And I had a delegation, a NAMBLA delegation, come to my house, and that was like the day before we were supposed to take the car trip to Chicago to shoot that scene, and they wanted to smoke pot together, and I wouldn't smoke pot with them. So that was sort of my test, like, let's do a criminal activity together, and then, we'll trust you, and I didn't want to go there, and so the trip was canceled. So that was one thing that we missed on. The other thing was there was the father of one of the kids in West Virginia. We happened to run into them in a gas station. We ran into one of the families that, Leyland had a relationship with one of the boys that was not on. And Leyland bribed the father by paying for the gas. Very poor family in the Appalachian Mountain. We got to go to their house, which was basically like a temporary home, like an RV type thing on top of a mud hill in the middle of nowhere, and it was just started to snow, and it was really bad. And we were shooting, and our battery went out exactly when Leyland took the kid into the forest, and so we didn't get that. And then later on, we changed the batteries, and then we went to the house, and I really wanted to do an interview with the father who allowed this to happen. He didn't want to talk. And so I offered him $200, which was everything I had on me, and I felt like I was crossing the line because I was very much like, the ethics of documentary and whatnot, but it didn't matter at this point. I just really needed to speak to this father, and he wouldn't do it. So that was, so a few of these scenes, could have potentially made this narrative arch a little, stronger and dramatic.
I think it's strong just as it is. I was just curious to see if it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's sort of an extension of the conversation you were just having as far as the ethics of documentary film. And I'm actually going to quote a local paper that spoke on the film. As objective as it is, you do an excellent job of handing the rope to them and they hang themselves. And so as a documentary filmmaker, was there any, as far as a student film, as it kind of blew up when it was in the festival scene, was there any fear or sense of responsibility of the fact that regardless of it being objective, you're still damning these people, and of any ramifications of putting them within the public light, and whether or not there has been any public ramifications against any of the subjects since the film sort of played festivals and hit the national film scene?
It's interesting because, so I don't know of any ramifications for the guys in the movie, but I do think that because there are not many windows into their lives, I do think that in the end of the day, it's probably net positive for them that they got to project themselves without a filmmaker who came in with an agenda to demonize them. So, I think it's always better to talk about it than to sweep it under the carpet, and in a way that's what we did here. And so I think that, net, they didn't suffer.
Yes.
How is this healing for you, going through what you did when you were 8?
Yeah, this was really great for me. I appreciate you asking the question. I mean, you have to deal with it somehow, and it's not an easy experience in the sense that, it has its baggage with you for years, and being open about it and exploring it and studying it and whatnot in a way that was very visceral and immediate, and certainly was only good for me.
Yes.
I guess just playing off that question, were there, obviously you're wearing two hats here, you're making your documentary and you're a victim, and were there any points during the process where you felt like you had to don't know, just watching this, like, what you feel like the most, visceral reaction towards these men, like, and for you, I can only imagine how much deeper that must go. Were there any moments during your project as your progress as an artist where you felt compelled to, I don't know, I guess, like, for lack of a better way of saying it, like, stick it to these men, you know what I mean? Like,
So I never did. The pedophile that molested me for about a year, he committed suicide when I was in 6th grade, about 3 years after he molested me. And I kind of always probably kept that in mind with regards to what a tragedy was, for him to live this life that led him to his death. So I think that I had, probably genuine compassion for these people, and I genuinely was, curious to know what the fuck they were thinking. So I don't think, it was that difficult for me to be amongst them.
Yes.
There were a couple scenes with the gentleman that had the answering machine that was
Renato.
He is very terrifying. The messages that you played were there, and I know there were protesters across the street. Were you and your crew subject to some of that negativity?
No, I think that the straight kids guys, the right-wing guys, I remember my cameraman, Nadav, taking his earring off before going to interview them because he, didn't want to fuck with them. So there was like, the only concern was maybe from those guys, but they seemed to have liked the movie.
Was it strange, with the scene you just described, like basically watching this guy buy a man's son, was that a strange thing? I guess it probably was a strange thing to witness, but were there ever any moments where you wanted to stop what you were, experiencing?
So I didn't get a sense of what was going on in that forest. It was also very cold, and it didn't last for long, and I can't say that I witnessed a crime and I didn't stop it. I was actually never asked that question, maybe because I've never told this story. So it's an interesting question, but it didn't feel at the moment like, oh my God, something horrible is going to happen and we need to stop filming and tend to it. Maybe, yeah. So.
Okay, well, one final thing. Now, the film had another life. When you were, from what I understand, you were sending it around to the FBI requested it at one point. You were speaking at psychology and sociology conferences. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
Sure, yeah, I still get, just like you guys reached out to me, I still get emails like, are you Adi Sideman made CHICKENHAWK? We're interested in the movie, we're working in a prison, we're academics, we're law enforcement, etc. So we're a film festival in Norway. So this stuff comes in about once a month. I was just telling my girlfriend and Liz, who are here with me. And because you guys were in Philadelphia, it was really fun to come down and have this night. So there's, I'm glad that it's out there and that it can provide some kind of value to the professionals who are dealing with it.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Adi. It's been a good time.